Hello and welcome to the shotgun shooting portion of the shotgun shooting merit badge for the camp and shoot. This is the third video. If you're needing the rifle shooting, please go find the second video. Let's review the NRA gun safety rules real quick before we get started. You have always keep your gun pointed in a safe direction. You have always keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. And always keep your gun unloaded until ready to use. As stated earlier, we'll cover these multiple times throughout these videos, and then also while we're safely shooting at camp and shoot. So for shotgun shooting sports, you have trap shooting, which uses live birds released from a special traps that began in Europe in around 1790, and it came to the United States about 1830. The targets, they replaced live birds with clay targets that we kind of know of today. In modern field trap shooting consists of 5 shooting stations located around 25 yards behind a single trap house for which the clay targets are thrown. And they're thrown going away from the shooter, about 22 degrees left or right. And while the shooter may know the elevation of the target's flight, the horizontal direction constantly varies, and it's not known until the target emerges from the trap house when the shooter yells pull. Another shooting sports that we could talk about is the sport of skeet shooting. Skeet shooting originated in the United States about 1920 as a way for hunters to simulate shots encountered in game bird hunting. It uses the same clay targets that are used in trap shooting. Skeet is shot on a semicircular skeet field consisting of 2 trap houses and 8 different shooting stations. The trap house on the left is known as the high house. The trap house on the right is known as the low house. The high house, the targets leave about 10 feet, and on the low house, they leave about 3.5 feet above the ground. And they're thrown so they pass over like a center stake in the middle of the semicircular field. Another sport we have is sporting clays, and it originated in France in the 1920s. It came to the United States in the 60s, and it's been growing rapidly in popularity since about 1990. Sporting clay courses offer a wide variety of shots that simulate those found in hunting of upland game birds, waterfowl, and even rabbits. And each sporting clay course is unique to that course. And it presents a mix of close range and mid-range and distance shots, traveling at different various speeds and different size clay targets. You may have your standard target or a smaller target that's about 90 millimeters, or even a smaller one that's about 60 millimeters, and that are extremely flat, that you may only get to see it when it actually turns in flight. And then they have some that are a little bit more tougher than the standard target that you know of today, that roll and bounce across the ground like its namesake of a rabbit. So earlier we talked about the 3 main parts of a long gun. We're going to break those down a little bit more and talk a little bit more about the different parts. So you have the butt, you have a comb, you have the grip, the forearm. These are all parts of the stock that are designed to help hold the firearms securely and comfortably and to help with a better shot. You have the loading port, the chamber, the action, the magazine loading port, the action release, a trigger guard, a trigger, and the safety. These are all part of the action. They're all used to help load, unload, and then the firing of the shot. And remember, on the safety, the safety on the firearm is a mechanical device that can and will fail. Your finger is the primary safety. Shoot first, or think first, shoot second. You have the barrel. And unlike in a rifle, there's no lands or grooves. The barrel is typically smooth. You have the rib, and you have the bead front sight. So you'll look down the rib and see the bead front sight when you're aiming the shotgun. Then you have the muzzle. So the different parts of a shotgun shell, um, you have the shell case. It's the outer container for all the other parts of the shotgun shell. You have the shot, which is the small round projectiles that are made of lead or steel or some other form of non-toxic shot that are located at the front end of the shell. And depending on the gauge and the shot size, one shell could have anywhere from 9 to 700 um, pieces of shot in them. You have the wad, which is either some sort of a fiber or a plastic that separates the shot from the powder, and it also forms a seal that allows the gases created by the burning of the powder to push the shot down the barrel. You have the powder, which is the powder charge that sits above the primer that allows for easy combustion to send the wad and the shot down the barrel. You have the brass head. You have the primer, and the primer is the detonating agent that's contained in the middle of the shell's base, or the brass head. So when the firing pin strikes this primer, the whole chain of events to send the shot down the barrel begins. You also have the crimp. So when you measure a shotgun shell, they'll tell you, hey, it's 2 3/4 or 3 inches or 3.5 inches. That's the length of the shell after it's been shot. So if you were to measure one before it's shot, it's not going to equal that. The crimp is the part that actually, once it's shot, makes it the length that they have written on that box. So the shooting sequence of shooting a shotgun shell, you have the firing pin strikes the primer, and it causes an indentation into that primer. That primer is going to ignite and detonate. It's going to cause a little bit of a spark. That spark is going to catch the powder that's inside there on fire, and it's going to cause that burning is going to cause gases to form and rapidly start to expand. And then that expanding hot gas is going to propel the shot down through the crimp, through the barrel, out the muzzle, and downrange. So when you go to the store and you want to buy a box, and this is a box you go pick up, and it says 20 gauge, 2 3/4 inches, 2.5 gram, 7/8 ounce, 7.5 shot. What exactly does that mean? Well, let's take a look and break each of those down separately. So some of the common shotgun gauges are 10 gauge, 12 gauge, 16 gauge, 20 gauge, and 28 gauge. And the smaller the gauge number, the larger the shotgun bore is. And the gauge is determined by the number of lead balls of size equal to the approximate diameter of the bore that it would take to weigh 1 pound. So on a 12 gauge, it would take 12 lead balls the same size as the diameter, or 0.725 of an inch, to be a pound. However, today, the shotgun gauge can be measured by much the same way as a caliber, by measuring the inside of the bore diameter. The only one that we don't measure as a gauge is a 410, and the 410 bore shotgun is the only exception to this gauge. It actually has a bore diameter of 410 1,000ths of an inch, which, if we were to put that into a gauge, it would come out to be about a 67.5 gauge shotgun. The gauge is usually marked on the rear of the barrel, and the gauge of a shell is typically marked on the brass head as well as on the factory box. And again, you don't want to use any sort of ammunition other than that the firearm is designed for. So let's talk a little bit about these different gauges and see what they're used for. A 10 gauge shotgun is primarily used by waterfowl hunters, especially like a goose hunting, and it's because of its larger barrel bore and a longer shell length offered by the 10 gauge when using non-toxic shot compared to the other shotgun gauges. But it's got a really stout recoil, and it's really heavy, or heavier than the other shotguns, so that does kind of limit the appeal of that to some hunters. The next we're going to talk about is the 12 gauge, and it's by far the most popular shotgun size in the United States and possibly the entire world. You can get that in almost any type of shotgun, from a semi-automatic to a pump action or anything in between. And the 12 gauge is the choice for big game, turkey, waterfowl, deer, upland, and small game. It's also probably the number one choice for home defense as well. The 16 gauge, it's more popular in Europe than it is here. It never really caught on with the American hunter. Most hunters said if I'm going to go with the 16 gauge, they either go with a 12 gauge or they would go with the lighter 20 gauge. The 16 gauge can do just about everything else as good as a 12 gauge, but with a little bit less recoil. And while it's capable of an all-round shotgun gauge suitable for deer, turkey, and duck hunting, the 16 gauge is most often used in the United States for hunting small game and upland game like pheasant, quail, dove, rabbits, and squirrels. Then we have the 20 gauge, which it ranks only behind the 12 gauge in terms of popularity. The 20 gauge is by far the most widely used of all the smaller gauges. It's available in a variety of shotgun types, but primarily a pump and a semi-auto. While the 20 gauge is on the lighter side for deer, turkey, and waterfowl, it'll work in a pinch, or if you're just looking for a little bit more of a challenge. It's mainly used for an upland and small game shotguns, and then close distance type deal. The 410 is going to give you a denser shot pattern than the 410, or the 12 gauge is going to give you a denser shot pattern than a 410. And it makes it a little easier to take a second or a rapid follow-up shot. A 28 gauge, it's somewhat common in upland game hunting and skeet shooting circles, but it's more powerful than a 410, but it still has a very gentle recoil. It's commonly available in a number of lightweight and easy to carry shotguns. However, the ammo for it is far from common. It's not rare, it's just not as common to see. But you could use it for skeet shooting as well as squirrel, rabbit, dove, grouse, some quail hunting. And then you have the 410, and it's the smallest shotgun bore. It's commonly used for small game hunting up close. It doesn't make for a good distance. It's really light recoil. But what it's mainly used for, and a good thing that it's used for, is just your run-of-your-mill varmint and pest control. Some sort of a single shot shotgun. So we mentioned shot size. That picture had a 7.5 ounce shot size, or 7.5 shot size. If we reference the table, we can see the diameter of some of the most common shot sizes, as well as the appropriate number of lead pellets that shot size take to weigh an ounce. And as you can see, the number of individual pellets in an ounce decreases as the pellet size increase in size. Some boxes of shotgun shells also may state the composition of the pellets. For instance, you could have lead-free, non-toxic shot is mandated for waterfowl hunting in North America. So shells marketed for waterfowl hunters will state that they contain pellets made of some sort of a bismuth or a tungsten or a steel or some other non-toxic lead or non-lead, but something that's non-toxic. Additionally, some upland and turkey hunting loads for use on larger birds will sometimes be copper plated so that they're less likely to deform on impact. Most shotgun shells are loaded with lead shot, and it's best to assume that you're dealing with lead if the box doesn't say anything about it one way or the other. So, you want to make sure that you wash your hands when you're done, just like with any shooting sports. Of all the other materials commonly used to produce shot, lead is the most dense. It means that given a number of individual lead pellets will weigh more than the same number of pellets for the same diameter made out of some other material. So to determine the size of the birdshot, what you do is you subtract the shot size from 17/100ths of an inch. So 0.17. So a 7.5 birdshot is 0.095 inches in diameter. So that would be 0.17 minus 0.075. So this is mainly for birdshot. It's not the same case with other types of shot like BB and buckshot. So looking back at this photo, the gauge size only describes the bore diameter of the shotgun. While it's extremely important, there's also other important characteristics of a shotgun shell to keep in mind as well. In addition to gauge, the shotgun shell also comes in varying lengths with different loads of powder and shot, and size and weight, and shot composition. So when we look back at this box that we got of 20 gauge shotgun shells, we can see that the box contains 20 gauge shells designed for use in a 2 3/4 inch chamber. And the individual shells are loaded with a 2.5 dram equivalent of powder and 7/8 of an ounce of 7.5 size shot. So the spot where it says 2 3/4 of an inch references the length of one of the shells after it's been fired, like I mentioned earlier. They're typically about a 1/2 inch shorter when loaded, and longer shells usually contain some combination of more shot and more powder for a higher velocity or a heavier shot load, so that all things being equal, a longer shell will kick more than a shorter shell of the same gauge. Remember to look on the barrel or the chamber of your shotgun to determine the proper length shell it can use. A shotgun with a longer chamber can generally safely use smaller shells, but the opposite is not true. So, 20 gauge shells are commonly available in both 2 3/4 inch and 3 inches in length. So in this case, you could fire those 2 3/4 shells in a 20 gauge shotgun with either a 2 3/4 or a 3 inch chamber. But you couldn't fire a 3 inch shell in one that only called for 2 3/4. With all of this in mind, and using the last chart that we looked at, we could determine that the box of 20 gauge shells that we've been talking about here contains approximately 305 lead pellets that are 0.095 inches in diameter. So then we get to the 2.5 dram equivalent part. And this part can be confusing, so bear with me here for a minute while I try to explain this. Dram is a unit of mass from the British weight system that can still remains in varying degrees in use of some sort of the former colonies. But back in the day of black powder, a dram was commonly used to measure the amount of black powder in a particular load. Most people probably know that there's 16 ounces in a pound. Well, there's 16 drams to an ounce. So therefore, there's 256 drams in a pound. And additionally, many gun enthusiasts know that there's 7,000 grains in a pound. This means that there's 27.34 grains in a dram. So a 2.5 dram load of black powder would weigh about 68.5 grains. So a long time ago, somebody somewhere determined that a certain 12 gauge shotgun load firing 1 1/8 ounce of shot with 3 drams of black powder had a muzzle velocity of about 1,200 feet per second. And it's a very cumbersome way of doing things, especially if you think that If you think that, you're right. And it's confusing. But since then, some companies and the manufacturers and today they start telling you the muzzle velocity of those shells instead of putting a dram equivalency on there, especially after the transition to a smokeless powder. Um, Dram equivalents are good for making an apples to apples comparison, but that's really about it. And so, like I said, for that reason, companies are making the transition away from listing dram equivalents on shotgun shells and instead just publishing the actual velocity of the load on the box. But you could still occasionally run into boxes bearing dram equivalent markings, but they're getting less and less common. So we're not going to move into the shotgun shooting fundamentals, and we need to determine the dominant eye. So to determine our dominant eye, we're going to extend our arms forward and form an opening between the hands. And with both eyes open, and you can see with both eyes open, you look at the distant look at a distant object through that opening. As you can see here in the second photo, you have that opening. And as you bring both hands back to your face while looking at the object, you're going to cover up your non-dominant eye, leaving the opening is going to be aligned with your dominant eye. And that's good to know because if it's on your right eye, you typically should shoot from the right shoulder, and on your left eye, you typically should shoot from the left shoulder. So for shotgun shooting, we have the shotgun shooting fundamentals. You have the stance, you have the shot preparation, and then sometimes the hold point and mount. You have the see or swing to the target. You have pull the trigger and follow through. So the shotgun stance, your feet should be about shoulder width apart with your toes on your lead foot slightly turned outward. The knee of the lead foot bent slightly and the back leg should remain straight. About 60% of your body weight should be on that lead leg and about 40% on the rear leg. You need to be comfortable and balanced so that it may be maintained before, during, and after the shot. The hold point, you know where the target will appear and the direction that it'll be traveling. Your hold point will be aligned to just under the flight path of the target to allow a clear view of where the target will first appear. And then you'll keep your shotgun pointed at the hold point, but the eyes are focused on the area where the target will appear first. So then you have the mount, and that's where you're gonna bring the shotgun up to your face and keep the head erect and level. You're gonna press your cheek firmly against the stock, and the head as far forward on the comb as possible without straining your neck. And the butt of the shotgun needs to be up in that pocket of the shoulder, and you need to hold it tight up close to the shoulder so that you don't have a gap there when you have that recoil, because it'll hurt more if you don't hold it tight up against you. So then you want to see the target, and then so you need to, the target must be seen clearly at the earliest point possible. You must be looking past the bead and focusing on the field of fire where the target is in focus. And then the sight picture is the visual relationship of that shotgun muzzle to the target. And then when acquiring the sight picture, the focus must be on the target. So you got to look down the rib of the barrel and the bead and see your target. So for the swing begins with the shotgun already mounted up to your shoulder. And then when the target is clearly seen, the shotgun is pointed at the target. So you're going to see it and you're going to start swinging with it. The trigger must be pulled the instant the sight picture is correct. And the target, so that's the target and the muzzle meet for straightaway targets. And that's kind of what we're going to be shooting, are more straightaway targets. So follow through it means continuing to do everything that was done at the time the shot was fired. You're still swinging, you're still following the target. That swing must continue if the shots are to hit the target. And that's the trigger is pulled while the shotgun is moving. The gun must continue to move after the shot is fired, because if you stop moving the gun, then those pellets aren't going to go where you want them to go, and you're going to be probably behind the target. So the most important shotgun shooting fundamental is see the target. You got to focus on that target. You must learn to concentrate on the target, and the follow through is got to be the second one. So the NRA gun safety rules, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction, always keep the finger off trigger until ready to shoot, and always keep your gun unloaded until ready to use. For shotgun, some of the other good rules to know is to know your target and what is beyond. Wear eye and ear protection is appropriate. Never use drugs and alcohol while shooting, and be aware that certain types of guns and shooting activities require additional safety precautions. I wanted to cover commence firing again. Remember, anyone, or for commence firing, will be started by the RSO on the course, and then you'll say pull to get the next one. You have cease firing, and anyone can call cease fire if they see an unsafe action. And when you start to shoot, you'll say pull, and somebody will, and you can't just say pull, you need to yell pull, because person that's operating the trap is going to also have safety eye and ear protection on, or hearing protection, and so you've got to be loud when you say it, and that way it tells them that you're ready for that clay target to be thrown. If you have any questions, let us know. We're excited to be hosting Camp and Shoot again. Our email address is crew82.norman@gmail.com. Once you finish filling out the worksheets, you can email those back to us. And if you have any questions, just email those and we'll be happy to answer them. And we're excited to see you at Camp and Shoot. Have a great day.